Where were you in the year 2000? Y2K was supposed to happen. That didn't happen. Google it if you don't know what it is. Apparently PS2 came out. The International Space Station got its first residents. And a little rural town in New South Wales was rocked by the death of one of its residents. This is Simply Murder. My name is Jackie, and today we're going to talk about the murder of John Price. So, where are we? Where did all this happen? Little town in New South Wales called Aberdeen. It would be fair to say it's probably seen better days, but it used to be really big in the meat industry, and it was a mining town. And I think those things still happen, but not to the same scale. It had 2, maybe 3 abattoirs in it, which will be important later. But they've all closed now. So, hundreds of people lost their jobs, It's up in the Hunter Valley, which is about 240 kilometres north of Sydney, which is about 150 miles or so. So we really are deep, dark, rural Australia. Okay, so it's a small town. That's where we are. As I already mentioned, it's the year 2000 and it's March the 1st, and a couple of police officers have been called to a house in St Andrew Street in Aberdeen to the residence of a local miner called John Price. Now, they had been called out by some neighbours and by some work colleagues of John's, because they were really concerned because he hadn't shown up for work, and his car, which was a ute, which if you're not in Australia is like a utility vehicle, like a pickup, I suppose. But yeah, his ute was still on the driveway, and that was really unusual for John. Even if he'd had a hard night at the pub the night before, he always showed up for work. He was a hard-working dude, he always showed up. So the fact that his ute was still there and he was a no-show at work really raised some red flags for people. So they called out the police with no question. Police showed up at around about 8 o'clock in the morning, and they noticed there was some blood on the door frame, which obviously is, a bit of a red flag, isn't it? But they tried the door as well. It was locked. They couldn't get any answer. So they go around the perimeter and they're checking through all the windows and they can't see anything. Maybe the curtains are shut, or maybe it's just so dark in the house. So they really can't see in. So they head round to the back door, and at the neighbours and the work colleagues' insistence, they were really worried about John. So they thought they'd better gain entry to the house. So they did that. They actually had to break in through the back door. And as they go through the door, and they're trying to enter into the hallway, they can't, because they've got like this, there was this blanket or sheet or curtain or something was blocking their way. And they thought that was weird, okay, curtain in the middle of the house. But, okay, let's just move it out of the way and we'll carry on searching the house for John. So the younger officer, there's 2 officers, the younger officer and the older officer, and I'm not going to mention any names because it gets really confusing when you mention names all the time. So if you want the names of the people involved in the case, they're all going to be in the description, the ones that I could find anyway. Alright, so the younger officer just moves the curtain aside, and as he's doing that, his arm gets cold and wet, and he looks down and he sees there's blood all over his arm, and he thinks, oh, I must have hurt myself getting in through the back door. The older officer, who was coming up behind him, had a closer look at what was hanging up on the door, and it wasn't a curtain or a blanket. It was actually a human skin. A whole human skin hanging from the door frame by a couple of meat hooks. What the fudge? How would you feel? How would you feel if you'd move this curtain aside, and it wasn't a curtain, it was someone's skin. It was like the whole pelt, for want of a better word. It's like, what the hell is going on in this house? Oh my God, that's crazy. Anyway, they leave it where it is, because obviously it's evidence. So they leave it where it is, and they make their way into the hallway, and they are greeted by a horrific sight. So in the hallway was just blood, all blood, everywhere, ceiling, floor, walls, blood everywhere. It's like, what the hell happened here? There was a large pool of blood on the floor, and it was big. It measured, I think I read it measured like 2 meters one way and the whole width of the hallway the other way, and it was a puddle. It wasn't just a stain on the floor, it was a puddle, and it was still a bit sticky and a bit tacky, so it hadn't completely dried yet. So they knew that whatever happened to have caused that puddle hadn't happened that long before they showed up. So it was at this stage that the younger officer thought, he took out his service pistol, revolver, whatever it is they have, and he thought, they still hadn't found John Price. They had no idea whether there was a murderer in the house lurking somewhere, so they had to be prepared, They've gone through all their training, they know what they're doing. So they carry on through the house, and they go into the lounge room. And in the lounge room, that's where they find the owner of the skin. They don't know it's John Price yet, because he's got no skin. He's got no genitals. They assume it's John Price because it's male, and they know it's male. Probably, yes, it's true. How do they know? No boobs, I suppose. So he had no boobs. And he had a note on his body, stuck on his body as well, which I'll talk about later. But so they go in there. They realise that this might be John Price. They're not really entirely sure, but it's looking more likely. But they still haven't found a murderer. So they had a look around at the scene. I suppose the biggest thing to say about the body was it didn't have a head. Sorry, probably a bit of important information there I should have imparted. There was no head on this body, and it had no skin, as you know, and it had been posed, which I think is just contemptible. It's like if you're going to pose a body, all you're doing is putting further humiliation on that person. And I know they probably do it because they want it to be a shock value to whoever finds the body, but it just shows the contempt, and they have no feeling whatsoever for this person. I find it despicable. When you read about that American case, Hillside Stranglers, they used to pose their bodies for maximum effect for whoever found them. It's like, that's disgusting. It's like, you've killed someone, just leave them be, let them rest in peace or whatever it is. Just don't pose them. Don't do that. That's okay. Back to the story. Sorry, I'm going off on tangents here. There was no head. And they noticed that from the body to the kitchen was like a line of like drips, like drip, 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 drip. And so they realised that, whoever took the head off has taken it into the kitchen. So naturally they head that direction, and they go into the kitchen, and they notice on the stove, on the hob, was a big pot. So big pot. So big. So I'm just big pot, big pot here, and it had a lid on it. So, and they didn't take the lid off, but the older officer turned around to the younger officer and said, "I bet you I know where the head is." And he was right. But they didn't take the lid off at that time. They did notice that the pot was still fairly warm, so it was still warm. So, like I said, whatever it had been cooking, it was no longer cooking, but It hadn't cooled down completely yet. And the other absurd thing they noticed was there was 2 meals on the kitchen table, and the meals were like plated up steak and veggies and potatoes and, you know, a little bit of gravy. And there were a couple of notes, and on the notes were written the names of John Price's children who resided in the house as well. And it just looked like normality amongst chaos, because the rest of the kitchen was blood-soaked. It was all the utensils that had been used to make the meal were all covered in blood. There was a knife sharpening stone there, covered in blood. There was the kettle, knives, there was knives everywhere. The stove top, the oven, everything covered in blood. And then you look over at the kitchen table and there's 2 meals, like this image of domesticity and chaos on the other side. It's like, what would you make of that? That's just, oh my God. God knows what's going through these guys' minds at this stage. But they've got a job to do. They still haven't found John Price as far as they know. So they're going to search the rest of the house, and they make their way out towards where the bedrooms are. And they hear snoring coming from one of the bedrooms. And in their mind, they're thinking they found a survivor. They found someone who might actually be a witness to whatever happened to the poor sod in the lounge room. Yeah. So they go into the bedroom and they see this woman lying on the bed, and she was snoring away, unconscious. They tried to rouse her. She wouldn't wake up. Really, really groggy. So they're thinking she's taken an overdose, and I'm assuming that there were some pill bottles or packets around her or whatever. But they think, okay, she's taken an overdose. We need to get her some help. We need this woman to survive because she might be a witness for us. So they actually carried her outside, and they called an ambulance for her, and she was taken off to hospital. They found out later that she had taken an overdose, and she was unconscious because one of the things she'd taken had been quite a sedating drug, so that's why they couldn't wake her up. So she stayed in hospital to recover from that, and then she was transferred to a psych unit, so a psychiatric unit, because, you know, she tried to take her life. So they found out that the woman who had been taken off in the ambo was Katherine Knights, and she was a de facto partner for John Price. And so they assumed that the body was that of John Price, and they were later proved correct. So what do they do now? Time to call the team in, I guess. Now, before we get to the investigation, I'd just like to talk to you about John Price, because it's very easy and very common for the victims to get forgotten in these stories, and it's all about the murderer and why they did it and how they did it and all of this. But at the end of the day, there was a person there who lost their life, and it's important that we remember them. So I really want to have a chat about John Price and who he was. Yeah. So he was 44 at the time of his death. He was born in 1955. He was a father to 3 children. He was separated or divorced from his wife. His younger child lived with his ex-wife, and he had the 2 older children with him. Now, I tried to find out how old these kids were at the time of his death, and I could not find it, but because they were involved in the court case and they gave evidence and they did a witness statement, victim impact statement, I'm assuming that they weren't young kids. They were like of an age, like teenagers maybe. Now, he was known to be a kind and loving man. Salt of the earth, rough, tough Aussie bloke. Yeah, think of a stereotypical bloke, Aussie bloke. That was John Price. Do anything for anyone, generous, hard-working. He never missed a day of work, ever. And he liked to drink. You know, I'm not trying to show him any disrespect whatsoever. I really don't want to do that. But he liked to drink. He wasn't an alcoholic, but like he'd go to the pub of an evening. That was his social life. That was how he relaxed. And he went there with his friends, and you know, that was his downtime from working so hard. And despite him doing that, he never missed a day of work. There's nobody calling in sick with a hangover. That just didn't happen. So he was always there every day. And that's probably why the boss was a bit worried when he didn't show up. Because, that's not him. So hard working, hard playing. Now, the other thing I found when I was doing some research about him is that there's a Facebook memorial page, and it's open, it's public, and it's so I had a quick look down, and it's full of photos, and it's just beautiful. It's like family and friends have come together, and I know it's just a Facebook page, but it's important. It's somewhere for them to air their grief, I guess. And like, it may have been 20 odd years ago, but every birthday, every anniversary, you miss that person, don't you? It's like, I wish so-and-so was here, yeah? And on this page, it reflects that. So anniversaries, birthdays, Christmases, it's messages there of like, oh, John, I wish you were here. I really miss you every day. And, you know, they loved him. He was a loved, important member of the family and friend. And it's just full of lovely messages and sadness tinged as well. It's like you can see that they really miss him. You know, it's really nice. Salt of the earth guy. It's like, this guy couldn't do anything wrong. But he was in this relationship and had been in this relationship for a number of years. And it was known to not be a very good relationship. It was known to be a violent and abusive relationship. And Katherine Knight was a bit, you know, she liked using her fists, and she was unpredictable and temperamental, and it didn't take much. You could look at her the wrong way and she would start off, you know. So that's really what the relationship was like. And, you know, the police started chatting to the people outside and the people that knew John Price, and they basically said that, you know, he was scared for his life. He knew how violent she could get, and he knew that she would kill him one day. And his friends were always telling him, you know, you've got to get out of this relationship, you know, she's no good for you, we don't want to be around her. But they stuck. They separated a couple of times, but they always got back together again. And, you know, I suppose it's difficult, isn't it, when you're in relationships, but I don't know. But he was abused. Fair enough. There's no other way of saying it. He was abused by this woman, and he paid the price ultimately. Now I'm going to get onto the investigation and the sequence of events in just a little bit, but I think it's important to maybe go back and look at Katherine Knight and try and get some sort of insight into why she was the way she was, because she was a horrible woman. And, you know, the nature-nurture debate, I think it was a bit of both with her, but she was born also in 1955, and it was a very dysfunctional family. Her father left, and she gained a stepfather who was an alcoholic, and he was violent and he was abusive, and it's been reported that he used to sexually assault his wife several times a day, and he didn't care if the kids were in the room or not. But it's also been reported that the wife was just as violent as he was, so she would, you know, give as good as she got, really. Yes, she was being sexually assaulted, but she was handy with her fists as well. She was yelling and screaming, and yeah, she used to give it back to him, you know. There is a rumour that, well, Katherine Knight claimed that she was abused as a child, but the police couldn't find any evidence of this, and they just felt that it was something she was going to use in her court case as sort of mitigation, but they couldn't confirm or deny it. So, I mean, apparently one of her brothers said that it was true and it really happened, but, you know, there's nothing to corroborate it, so they didn't really it wasn't brought up as a big issue. At school, she was seen as being a bit of a bully. What do you expect, really? She was violent, she was argumentative, she would start fights with everyone, she would pick on the little guy all the time, but she'd pick on the big guys too. Unpredictable. Slightest thing would set her off. She ended up leaving school at 15 and was described by people that went to school with her as quote unquote rough as guts, which is a very Australian term, but yeah, she was rough. And when she actually left school, she got a job in a clothing shop, which she worked at for a little while. I mean, this woman was basically illiterate. She could barely read or write. But she managed to secure her dream job. And I say dream job because that's how it was described. That's how she felt. And it was working at one of the local abattoirs. I'll just let that sit there as a dream job. Who wants to work in an abattoir? I mean, really? I know someone has to, but I don't think any of them would describe it as their dream. She worked her way through the various ranks, whatever it is in the abattoir. She ended up in the bone room, which was like the pinnacle, I suppose, and gained a lot of knife skills. Yeah. She was described as being quite cruel. You know, it's like you hope that abattoirs are quite humane, but no, she was described as being quite cruel to the animals, and she really didn't care about how they suffered or whatever. She was given her own set of knives when she got to the bone room, and these were her pride and joy. She used to love these things, and obviously I'm not going to take it away from her, she was skilled working with them, and she used to hang them above her bed. Yeah, apparently everywhere she lived, that's where she hung her knives. Now, I don't know whether she hung them like on the wall, like you see swords up against the wall, or whether she actually hung them straight down from the ceiling. But you're lying in bed and you look up and all you see are these knives. It's like, that is scary shit right there. It's like, how could you sleep? How could her partner sleep? Apparently her house, sorry about the move there, apparently her house was full of taxidermied animals. I don't know whether she did it herself. I don't think she did it herself. I think she bought taxidermied animals and violent movies, and she used to have this farm machinery that used to hang off the ceiling. I mean, this woman was weird. Now, she'd had several relationships, of which all had ended, surprise, due to her violence and her paranoia. She was always thought that her partners were going to be, cheating on her all the time. So she never really relaxed or anything with her partners, because she always felt whenever they were not in her sight, she thought that they were cheating on her. She did get married once. Her first husband was another rough, tough Aussie bloke, and on the wedding day, I couldn't believe this, but on the wedding day, Knight's mother came up to him before they got married and said, "Watch out for her, because she can kill you." And so this guy walked down the aisle and married this woman with that in his head, from Knight's own mother. Anyway, that actually was a bit of foreshadowing, really, because on the wedding night, after a day of drinking and intoxication and, having a fine old reception, he awoke on the wedding night to find Katherine strangling him. Literally strangling him. And it's like, what are you doing? He managed to get free, And it turns out that she was strangling him. She was trying to kill him because he hadn't performed well enough. He'd only managed to do it 3 times on the wedding night, when she felt it had to be 5 times at least. And because he'd only managed it 3 times, which I think is pretty good going for someone who is intoxicated, then 5 times. Oh, it's not funny, but that was her expectation, at least 5 times, and he didn't quite manage it, so she was going to kill him. Think about that psychology, if you will. But that wasn't the only incident. He actually stayed with her. They actually had a daughter out of that marriage. And there was one night where he used to play in a local darts match at one of the local pubs, and he was late home. She knew that the pub had shut, and so she didn't know why he wasn't home already. And she actually rang up and said, "Can you tell my husband to get his ass home, because, you know, it's pub's closed. What the hell's he still doing there?" And as he walked in the door, she hit him with a frying pan. Big iron bottomed frying pan. She actually fractured his skull. 1 hit. He left after that. Surprise, surprise. Yeah, he left after that. And he bogged off up to Queensland because he wasn't having any more. He was fed up. It was, you know, this was constant violence and arguing, and he'd had enough. So he went off to Queensland. Now, as you can imagine, Katherine didn't take this very well. Didn't take this news too well. And she was seen walking along the street with the pram, with her very young baby in the pram, like newborn, and she's throwing the pram around and like picking it up and throwing it into the road and all of this, right? She ends up getting taken into hospital, and it turns out that she had like postnatal depression. Well, that's what they claimed. They claimed she had postnatal depression and that she was admitted to a psychiatric unit. And in Australia we have mother and baby units for this sort of thing, so I'm assuming, I couldn't find out, but I was assuming that she kept her baby with her while she was in there. Now, she wasn't in there very long, so they actually, you know, there's such a demand on these places, so they let her out, and she went home to her empty house. Still no husband. She's still a bit doolally up here, and she doesn't know what the hell's going on. So she takes her baby, who is 8 weeks old at this stage, and puts the baby on the railway lines and walks away and leaves the baby on the railway lines. She walks up into the town using one of her favoured butcher knives. She kidnaps a woman, forces her into the woman's car, and tells her that she has to drive her to Queensland to find her husband. Okay, the woman doesn't know what the hell she's doing. What the hell? So halfway or on the way, they had to stop for petrol or something, and the woman managed to get away and call the police. And the police managed to disarm her of her knives, and back into the mental hospital she goes, back into the psychiatric unit. Oh, the baby was rescued just in time. So, you know, the train was on its way, someone saw the baby, and they actually managed to get the baby to safety. So, thank God that happened. Now, when the husband heard about what had been going on, and that she'd had postnatal depression, and that she'd been in hospital, he came back. Came back from Queensland. He ended the relationship he'd started up there, and he came back tonight to Katherine Knight. I have no words. They had another child, but the relationship fizzled out. It sort of didn't carry on, and yeah, they'd had 2 children, but he managed to get away again, so he's still alive. Thank his lucky stars, eh? She had another relationship with another guy. She had another child with another guy, and this one she also assaulted with a frying pan. Didn't fracture his skull this time, but yeah, she still hit him, stabbed him with a pair of scissors. The worst thing, and the thing that really upset me when I read it, was she killed an 8-week-old puppy. So he'd got an 8-week-old puppy for himself, for the house, and she killed it in front of him. And the reason why she did it was as like a warning to him, like, if you ever cheat on me, if you ever leave me, then this is what's going to happen to you. You know, slit his throat and threw it out. It's like that. It's just barbaric, but understandable. I mean, like, not understandable, but it's understandable that she would do that to a puppy, because she's got no feelings for animals. She doesn't care about animals. You know, she worked in an abattoir, for God's sake. So, you know, killing a puppy is probably nothing to her. Everything to me. Oh my God. But yeah. Now, he actually left her and went into hiding because of all these warnings he'd been given. So he actually went into hiding, and she wasn't very happy about that, but she couldn't find him. She did try. She couldn't find him. She had another relationship with another guy, had another child with this guy as well, but during this relationship she started seeing John Price as sort of an affair. So that relationship ended, and she's now with John Price. Now, John Price would have known. He would have known her reputation. He would have known what she was like. I mean, all these relationships happened in this small rural town, so everyone knows everyone. So she would have known what sort of personality. He would have known what sort of personality she had. And you know, his friends warned him off, you know, but he felt he could manage her. You know, the good times must have outweighed the bad to him, and despite the fact that there was lots of arguments and everything, he felt that he could manage it quite well. So so that's what happened. I mean, they stayed together. They did separate in 1998, and the reason why they separated in 1998 was she basically dobbed him in to his boss. So John had brought home some first aid kits from work, and they were expired, so they'd actually been thrown out into the rubbish. And so he grabbed them because he thought there was something, you know, rather than go to landfill or whatever, there might be something useful in there that he could use, you know, things like bandages and stuff like that. I mean, sterility will be gone, but so what? It's like, they're still useful, yeah? So he brought them home. Now, she went and got a video camera and videoed these first aid kits. Didn't say that they were expired or taken from the rubbish, and basically said in the video that he had stolen them from his work. And so she then sent that video to his boss. Now, how would you feel if your partner did that to you? I know how I feel. She chucked him out. He chucked her out for that, because he lost his job. He'd worked for that guy for 17 years, and company policy, they didn't take his excuses into account. He lost his job. He lost his livelihood. So he kicked her out, and he should have left her out. A few months later, they got back together again, and you know, he felt he could manage her still. But when he took her back, he lost a lot of friends, and he had to change his pub. He couldn't drink in the same pub anymore. He had to go to a different pub, and he lost a lot of friends because basically they didn't want to be around her. You know, they didn't want the arguments. They didn't want her to be rowing with them all the time and using her fists all the time and being argumentative and unpredictable, and they didn't want to be around that. And you can't blame them for that. They just didn't want to be around her, and they want to be around him, but she came with him, and they didn't want to be around her, so they just sort of didn't really want to sort of cut ties with John, which is a real shame. But now, the day of the murder, John Price had actually gone to the courthouse on the day of the murder because he wanted to get an AVO, and an AVO is an apprehended violence order, and it's basically like a restraining order, and he just wanted rid of her. And the lead up to that had been that about 3 weeks prior, she'd stabbed him in the chest, up here, like upper left chest, and no permanent serious damage was done, but it was still there. And then the night before, the day of his murder, so the night before, he'd woken up and seen her standing over the bed, like Paranormal Activity style, standing over the bed staring at him, and she had her hands behind her back. He didn't know whether she had a knife there or what, but she was standing there. It's like, how fucking creepy is that? But yeah, so he was spooked. So on the day of his murder, he had gone to the courthouse to get a restraining order. He wanted her out of the house, and he wanted her to stay out of the house and as far away from him and his kids as possible. He went off to work, and when he was at work, he actually turned around to his boss and said, "If I don't come into work tomorrow, call the police because she's done me in." That's a quote. "If I'm a no-show, she's probably killed me." Now the boss was shocked when he said this, and he actually said to him, "Look, come home with me, I can put you up, that's fine." But he declined. He said, no, I'll go home. So he finishes work for that day, and he goes home, and the children aren't there, the kids aren't there, and it transpires, it's reported that Katherine Knight arranged for all the kids to go to a friend's house for a sleepover, so they weren't actually going to be in the house. So he had a spare evening, and he went over with his friends, his neighbours, and he had a few drinks with his neighbours, and he said a similar thing to his neighbours. This guy was rattled. He was really scared, and he turned round to his neighbours and said, "Look, if you see my ute on the drive in the morning and I haven't gone to work, just call the police, because I think she's going to do something tonight." And the neighbours are going, don't go home, stay here, I'll put you up, don't go home. And he goes, "I have to go home, it's my house, I've got to look, it's my house, and it's my children, and I don't know whether she's going to harm the children, I have to go home." Right? So he did, and we know what happened. Well, we're going to find out what happened, but yeah, he decided to go home to look after his house. And it turns out that a lot of the arguments they'd been having were about the fact that he wouldn't marry her, and he didn't want to get married again, but she wanted to get married again. She felt she was entitled to his stuff, his house, all his stuff, that's how she felt. But he wanted to. He's a hard-working guy. Yeah, he had a good salary, and he wanted to leave his stuff for his children. He wanted the house to be for his children. He wanted all his belongings to be for the children. He didn't want to get married to a woman who was going to take it all. That was his legacy for them, and that's what he wanted. Okay, so that was John Price's day of the murder, what he got up to. What she did was also quite significant. So apparently she got that video camera again. Loves her video camera, and she took video of the kids and her house and her belongings, and she's basically saying in the video that I want this to go here and that to go there, and this is what the children want to do, and I love my children, I hope to see them again, quote unquote, which is a very weird thing to say, but in hindsight, if she's planning on offing herself, then that's why she said it, I guess. But it's also a bit of premeditation. Stupid thing to do and say. But yeah, the police sort of interpreted this video as being like a crude will. That's how they interpreted it. Now, apart from that, she went out and bought some sexy lingerie. I don't know what exactly, but she went out and bought something, some lingerie, some undies, tidy whities, probably not. And she also took her older daughters out for dinner. And according to her daughter's testimony, this is unheard of. She never does this. She never takes us out for dinner. It's like they couldn't understand why she was doing it. But it was a nice thing, so they didn't think anything of it at the time because, Well, you wouldn't, would you? You wouldn't think what's going to happen is going to happen. So they thought it was odd. So yes, that was her day. And then after 11 o'clock, so after John Price had gone home, she let herself into the house. He was asleep in bed. She said she watched a bit of TV that evening, and Star Trek I think it was, and then she went and had a shower. Then she goes, don't forget that there's an AVO against her at this time, so she shouldn't even be in the house. But she goes and gets into bed with John Price, wakes him up, and they have sex. Okay. Didn't John remember that there was supposed to be an AVO? She shouldn't have been there? I suppose in that situation, one part of your body sort of takes precedence over your brain. I don't know. I'm not a man. I don't know. Does that happen? Anyway, that's that. He fell asleep, as men do. He fell asleep, and basically she left the house and withdrew. She stole one of his cards, withdrew $1,000 from his account. Now that money has never been found. So what she did with it, we don't know. She didn't give it to her kids. She didn't leave it in the house. We don't know where it went. But $1,000 was withdrawn from his account during that night when pathologist says he was already dead. So it was definitely her that did it. Where did that money go? Where could it have gone? It wasn't in the house. It wasn't on her person. Where could it have gone? Anyway. They couldn't talk to Katherine Knight because she was in hospital, and they wouldn't let her be interviewed for like 4 or 5 days or so. But, the police had to do their investigation regardless. So meanwhile, they're getting all the background, and forensics are doing their thing. And I think, let's talk about what the forensics did next, because what they did was an outstanding job, and it was really, really well done. And it really told the story of what happened to John Price that night. Right, so on to what happened to John. This is taken from the forensics testimony plus what the medical pathologist who did the post-mortem has said. So I've sort of amalgamated both of those things, and this is what happened. So the attack started in the bedroom. John Price was in bed lying on his back, and it's assumed he was asleep. He obviously woke up when he started being stabbed, and there was lots of stabs to the front of his body. He managed to get up out of the bed, and he made it towards the light switch. So remember I was saying how dark the house was with all the curtains, and it was night time obviously, so it was even darker. He tried to get to the light switch, and we don't know whether he managed to turn it on or not. It was off when the police arrived the following morning, but there was blood on the light switch, so they knew that he went for the light switch, and they could see the trail of him being stabbed and bleeding on the floor. He managed to get out into the hallway. Excuse me. He managed to get out into the hallway, and he's trying to escape. He's heading for the front door, and meanwhile he is being stabbed constantly in the back, because there were stab wounds to his front and his back, and the pathologist felt that there could have been more injuries to his body, but it was sort of hidden by the post-mortem mutilations, so he probably had more. He got into the hallway, and he even managed to get to the front door. Now they know the route he took to get to the front door because of the blood spatter. At one point he was stationary and he coughed, because there's a cough splatter on the wall, but they could see on the walls of the hallway like these big swathes, or should I go that way, big swathes of blood, massive blood. And the thing that I felt was really sad was the closer you get to the front door, the lower those swatches of blood got, where he's getting weaker, and he's losing a lot of blood, and he's getting weaker and weaker. And the pathology reported that, you know, major organs had been penetrated at this point. So he'd got stab wounds to both his lungs, to his stomach, to his liver, to his spleen. A bit of his kidney was sliced off. He had deep, major wounds, so there was no wonder he was getting weaker and weaker. He managed to get to the front door, and he's still being stabbed the whole time, remember? She's chasing him, and he either fell back into the hallway or he was pulled back into the hallway, and at this stage he wouldn't have been able to put up much of a fight. And he finally passed away on the floor of the hallway where that big puddle was, and he basically lost most of his blood supply there in that big puddle that I talked about earlier. Sometime later, they felt it was maybe an hour or more later, she dragged his body into the lounge room. Now they know that it was later on because there was no blood left basically, and when they dragged him in there was no big staining or big puddles or anything in the lounge room. So there was a drag mark of his body into the lounge, and that's where she skinned him. So that's when she removed his skin, that's when she removed his genitals, and then she removed his head. And they know that he'd been dead for some time at this point, and they know that he had, sanguinated, you know, when they got no blood left, because there wasn't much from the beheading, and that there wasn't much blood in the lounge room, but there was obviously enough to do the drips to the kitchen. She took the genitals and took the head into the kitchen and put them into the pot and cooked the head. She even put some veggies and some stock and that in, trying to make a nice little stew with his head and genitals. Loopy woman, loopy. Meanwhile, she also removed his buttocks. So, gluteus maximus, is that the name of the big muscle in the bum? She took those muscles and made 5 steaks out of them, cooked the steaks with the veggies and the potatoes and that in the oven, and plated them up with some gravy and other condiments and that, and left them on the table with a vindictive note. Now, I don't know what the vindictive note said. I mean, I don't know, you can make a guess how horrible this woman is, but it basically had the names of John Price's children that resided in the house. That's who the meals were meant for. So she must have known that it was never going to happen because of the circumstances of the house, but she must have known that they were never going to eat it. But the fact that she left the notes there, and she wanted John Price's children to eat his flesh, I mean, that's just sick. That is psycho sick. The 5th steak was thrown out in the garden. There is rumours and speculations that she tried it, and you will find many people who talk about this story call her the cannibal killer, but there is absolutely no evidence that she tried it. There's no evidence. She claims she didn't. Well, she can't remember, she says, but she claims that there was no cannibalism, and there's no evidence of it. There's no chew marks on the steak that was put out in the garden or on the plates. So whether she took another bit of his body, there's no evidence of that either. So yeah, so basically there's no evidence at all that she tried it herself. So I don't believe that she is a cannibal. Some people do, but I don't. Then she, after doing all this, she posed the body, like I said before, and I think she posed him with, he was holding a bottle of booze, and she crossed his legs over, and I don't know, there's no crime scene photos, thank God, I don't want to see them, but there's no crime, so I don't exactly know how she posed the body, but it was posed anyway, and that's just contemptuous. That's just full of contempt. I don't know what the word is. I don't know words today. That's just humiliating. Oh, here we go. Hello. Yeah, so that's what she did. Posed the body and went and took her overdose and went asleep. Now, the other thing to note is that the overdose that she supposedly took was blood pressure tablets and a drug here called promethazine, which has got a brand name of Phenergan, and that's like, it's a sedative antiemetic, so you tend to give it to kids who have got travel sickness and that you want them to sleep, and it makes you sleep, which is why she was unconscious and groggy. So yeah, it's I mean, I suppose, I don't know how much she took, but it probably wouldn't kill you to take a lot. And the blood pressure tablets, what are they going to do? Make your blood pressure go too low, I suppose. But yeah, it's odd. The combination of drugs, the pathologist who came back and did the toxicology on her basically said that it wasn't a genuine attempt, because the drugs were all at a therapeutic level in her body. So she didn't take enough to do herself really any harm. They just put her to sleep for a bit. Now, according to the pathologist, there was 37 stab wounds, deep stab wounds, and like I mentioned earlier, there could have been more, but it was difficult to tell. The skin was removed in one piece, and it was remarked by the pathologist that he felt it was expertly done by someone with a knife skill. And like, we know she had these knife skills. I mean, we know she had these skills. But just have a think about removing the skin from a body. It's not easy. Well, I haven't done it, but it's not easy. I mean, can you imagine getting them off the toes and little nooks and crannies around the body and hands and things? It must be hard to do in one piece, but she managed it. So I'll give her that. She's good with a knife. That's all I'm giving her. They also said that the head was expertly removed as well, comparable to someone who had skills with knives. And yeah, she probably would have got that skill from working in the abattoir as well. So yeah. Now, I did mention there was a note left on his body. The note was awful. There are copies of the notes online, and I have to say right now, and the police say it as well, that the accusations made in this note are completely and utterly groundless. Okay? The note stated that John Price had sexually assaulted her daughter. That didn't happen. How dare she try to slurry his name by doing that? And I'm only thinking that she must have done it as some sort of mitigation for what she did, some sort of reason for why she did it. But if you look at this note, and if I've got a photo, I'll put it up. I don't know if I have, but if you look at this note, you can see that she's basically illiterate. It was so hard to read, but there is no evidence whatsoever that this ever happened. And from what I've read about John and the way he was and the way she is, I don't believe that either. I think she basically did it just to give herself a reason for doing it. Yeah. So I take, I mention it briefly because I think it's shit. I think it's absolute rubbish. Okay, let's get on to the trial, because she was arrested while she was in the psychiatric unit and questioned when she came out. When she came out, she basically said she couldn't remember anything. She could remember taking her daughter out. She can remember having sex. She can even remember what she was watching on TV. That's how we know it was Star Trek. And then she can remember waking up in the hospital, but she can't remember anything in between. But she can tell She told the investigators what tablets she took. As far as I'm concerned, that's part of that whole process. If she can't remember the murder, but she can remember taking the drugs. Fucking ropey, tell you. So questioning was really not very enlightening, really. She claimed she actually said, quote unquote, I may have done it, but I can't remember. I've got amnesia. And that was going to be her defence. Does that ever work these days? I don't think it ever works. It's so hard to get amnesia. There's some things I wish I could get amnesia for. Anyway, so on to the trial. So, it took about a year for the case to actually get to trial. And she actually initially wanted to claim manslaughter. That was rejected. The judge is, Judge O'Keefe, lovely man. I'll put his details down in the description. But yeah, he was a lovely guy. He said he couldn't eat meat for several months after the case because of the circumstances of the case. I mean, don't blame him. Jesus, I think I'd be vegetarian as well. But yeah, so he rejected her manslaughter plea. So she was arraigned on the murder charge. And she finally went to proper court, I think it was the year after. I think it was October in 2001. Now, what was unusual about the court case was, I don't know if you know, but in the UK and in Australia, if you're on the electoral roll, you can get called for jury service, yeah? The prosecution and the defence don't really have any say about who's on the jury, and I don't know, I can only go by what I've seen on American shows, but they seem to have a say as to who's on the jury or not. They can reject certain clients, certain jury members, but that doesn't happen here. Basically, you are randomly selected from the electoral roll, and unless you are related to anyone who's involved in the court case, or you're dying on your deathbed, you can't get out of it. It is compulsory. You could be in the middle of the sea on a boat. You have to come back for jury service, okay? It is compulsory. And you don't really get a say about what cases you go to or anything. You are just randomly selected, completely random. But in this instance, the judge actually gave the jury who was initially selected the option to leave, because of the circumstances of the evidence that they were going to be presented with. And 5 members decided, yeah, I don't want to be involved. And so they actually did leave, and more left in the early stages. But when they finally managed to get a complete jury that were aware that they were going to be presented with some horrific stuff, something happened. So the defence barristers actually approached the judge and claimed that, or said that, Katherine Knight wanted to change her plea to guilty. Now, the judge was a bit concerned that she was going to change her plea to guilty, because he needed to know that she was fully aware of the consequences of her claiming with a guilty verdict. He wanted to make sure that she knew what that meant. You know, you're going to go to prison for a long, long time. And also that she was fit to plead, because the circumstances of the murder, he didn't know whether she was crazy, and whether there was something fundamentally wrong with her. So he really had to make sure that she was aware of all that. So he actually had 3 psychiatric assessments done on her, and it basically came back saying that she was fit to plead, she was not mad. She did have borderline personality disorder. Well, duh, of course she bloody did, all the way she behaved. But not to say that all BPDs are like that, I'm just saying it was pretty obvious that she would have a personality defect. But yeah, so she had BPD, but that is not a mental disorder, so that isn't a reason for doing something you shouldn't be doing. It's just basically a personality flaw. That's all it is. So it doesn't explain what she did in any way. So she was not mad, she was just bad. So they went forward with the guilty plea, and that meant that the jury, despite all the shenanigans with getting a proper jury, they were all dismissed. They didn't need to be there because she'd pled guilty, but the evidence still had to be presented. And that was really interesting because throughout the whole court case she just sat there impassive, didn't make any eye contact with anyone, didn't talk to her legal counsel, didn't move unless evidence was being presented which was uncomfortable for her to listen to. Her defence had tried to get her dismissed from the court altogether. Like, they didn't want her there and she didn't want to be there, but the judge said, tough tits, you have to be there. He didn't say that, but he said no, she has to be here, she has to listen to the evidence. So whenever anything uncomfortable was coming up, like especially when the forensic team and the medical pathologist was discussing the circumstances of the murder and the post-mortem and everything, she would start playing up. She would start effing and blinding, pretending she's having an epileptic fit, shouting at everyone. Basically, she had to be sedated. And she would do this whenever she wanted the court to be adjourned. And so the judge had no choice but to adjourn for the day because she had to be sedated and could no longer be present for the court case. So she was manipulating the court. She just didn't want certain things to be talked about, and tough they were. He was worried, the judge was worried that she was going to claim insanity at a later date, but getting the psychiatric assessments negated that. She couldn't claim insanity during an appeal or anything because she'd been declared sane. The trial lasted about 5 weeks, and Katherine Knight never gave evidence in her own defence. She was basically convicted. She pled guilty. She was convicted of murder, and she was sentenced to whole life term without parole. Now, the judge didn't say without parole. He just said going for life. He marked her papers never to be released under any circumstances. Now, she did appeal in 2006, and I'm assuming she appealed because she wanted a minimum tariff or a maximum tariff. She wanted to know whether she was ever going to get out, and that was thrown out of court as well. So they took the original judge's, Barry O'Keefe's, comments into account and basically said, no, you're never to be released. She's going to die in prison, and that's fine by me. So that's basically the court case. So she wasn't very happy with her sentence, but as far as I'm concerned, she should be swinging. I really wish we still had the death penalty here in Australia. I really wish we did, because there are certain people that I'm going to talk about on this channel, and her particularly, who really shouldn't be alive today. They shouldn't be alive. They should be dead. Maybe that's too good for her, though. Maybe she deserves to rot in prison. I don't know. What do you think? There was a couple of things that came to light after the court case. A bit of aftermath. John Price's brother sat through the entire case. He heard everything. He heard all the gory details. He couldn't take it. He took his life not long after sentencing. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, that's one more for Katherine Knight. She killed 2, not 1. That was just disgusting. It was so sad. So sad. She is detained at Silverwater Women's Correctional Centre, which is a little bit west of Sydney, and she's going to stay there for a long time. She is now in her 60s, and probably more actually. No, she's in her 60s. Apparently she's called the Nana. She spends her time painting and knitting and sewing and that sort of shit. She's a bit of a queen bee apparently. She helps new inmates adjust and sorts out disputes between inmates and shit. So she's like a queen bee. But as far as she's gonna die in prison, and I don't care. She refuses interviews. She hardly gets any visitors, and John Price's kids gave victim impact statements during the court case, and there's no transcript of what they said. I can't see it, but you can guess what they said, can't you? You can guess that they talked about the confusion about why it happened, how much they missed their dad, how it's fundamentally affected their lives going forwards, and you can imagine what they said. And I know it's a big thing in America, but I've not heard of victim impact statements being done that often here. But yeah, it's just it was just really shit, such a horrible case. Another thing which came out during the medical pathologist's testimony is that he said how expertly she managed to remove John Price's skin, and apparently because she did it all in one, she did it so well that could actually be sewn back onto his body at post-mortem before the funeral and stuff, so it looked like he hadn't been skinned at all. So they felt it was so expertly done that they could sew it back on without any obvious signs that it hadn't always been there, which was quite interesting, I guess. But well, that's the story of John Price's murder. I always think it's important to talk about the victim. It's the victim's story, not her story. It's the victim's story, and he had a horrific death, and she deserves to be where she is. And the judge said that she's likely to do it again, and men are in danger everywhere. Everyone, really, especially men, would be in danger if she was ever to be released. She's never going to get out. I hope she dies soon. That's a horrible thing to say, but I hope she dies soon. So anyway, that's the story. Please tell me in the comments your thoughts on the case, if you knew about the case beforehand, how you feel it was dealt with, what you think about her. If you knew John Price, then I hope that you can give me some, did I do it justice? Did I help him? Did I not help him, but did I tell his story sympathetically? I hope I did. Did I get everything right? It's like sometimes you do research and you don't know whether you get anything right. But the comment section, please let me know. Now I know this setup is really rubbish. I know that I don't have the equipment that some people have. I don't have my own studio. I don't have lighting and fancy cameras and stuff. So, but this is a brand new channel, and I hope it's going to evolve and get better. And if a lot of people like what I do, then yeah, just give us a like. Let me know that you like what I do. Constructive criticism is great. Haters are always going to hate, but they can piss off. If you've got some constructive criticism about how I can make things better, then let me know. This is an evolving channel, and next week I've got a case lined up. It's another Australian case, but if you want to hear about a case that you're particularly interested in, you want to hear my views on it, or you want it to be told the way I do it, because I don't use scripts or anything, then let me know. I'm open to anything. I live in Australia, so Australian cases are the ones that are in my view most of the time. But if there's a case out there that you'd like me to cover, then just let me know in the comments. And that's it. So that's it for tonight. So thank you so much for being here. If you got it through to the end, then well done you. hopefully I'll see you next week. If this gets really bad reviews, I might not see you next week. So this might be a 1 episode only channel. But, you know, if you want to hear anything else, comment section. Go to the comment section. Like, subscribe, do all that stuff if you want to.